Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Total War Shogun 2 Fall of the Samurai, and one of the things that does very well and makes the campaign significantly more interesting to play, in particular in the endgame, is not the secret that Total War has struggled throughout the years with creating a very good endgame situation. In fact, the vanilla version of Shogun 2 actually does struggle with this. Realm divide as a mechanic just isn't that great. But Fall of Samurai as an expansion does improve significantly in this aspect in the way that they do handle this. And this is something that other Total War games really could use. And it's something that Creative Assembly has tried to replicate. You had the Shield Civilization event in Warhammer 1. Then you had the Coalition that you could build up in Three Kingdoms, but neither of those systems were that great, and certainly not as good as what you have in Fall of Samurai. So let me explain. So in Shogun 2, you have your faction fame. As you conquer territory, defeat enemies, you build fame. And as you're building up this fame, you will gain, you are getting closer and closer and closer to achieving significant power on the campaign map. The thing to understand about this, as you're capturing territory, the bigger the threat you are going to be perceived by all the factions on the campaign map. Now, what was annoying in the vanilla version of Shogun 2 is that it would basically turn everyone against you, which wasn't a great situation. But in Fall of Samurai, well, Fall of Samurai is built on the idea that you have this major conflict that's going to take place between the pro-imperial factions and the pro-shogunate factions. You can choose to go independent, but going independent means that you're basically going to end up in a war with everyone. So if you want to find the entire campaign map on your own, you can certainly go independent, though it is not necessarily going to go very, very well for you. But honestly, I'm quite tempted to just play a campaign as that. But the default mode for Shogun 2 is to play either Imperial or Shogunate. Now, the way this plays out in on the campaign map is you start with an allegiance and you can convert it. So you either start pro-Imperial or pro-Shogunate as the Shimazu clan, as the Satsuma. I do start as pro-Imperial. In fact, I am the core. The Satsuma are the core Imperial faction. They're the most powerful Imperial faction on the campaign map in a lot of ways. But you can certainly convert to the Shogunate allegiance if you want to do so, and be very weird from a historical standpoint, considering what Saigo Takamori ended up doing. But regardless, as you're building up this fame, and being pro-Imperial will improve your relations with other pro-Imperial factions, being pro-Shogunate will improve your relation with pro-Shogunate factions, and obviously decrease your relations with the other ones. But eventually, once you get to the highest level of fame in the campaign, you will be faced with a choice. Either stick to the allegiance that you have before, so pro-Shogunate or pro-Imperial, or decide to go independent. Now, if you stick with your allegiance, this will basically start, really kick off the Meiji Restoration. Basically, it will, or not, either way, it will kick off a major global war between the pro-Imperials and pro-Shogunate forces. So over here, in this campaign situation, I am allied with virtually all the other pro-Imperial factions, minus one or two. I just forgot to deal with them diplomatically. But certainly I can achieve alliances with everyone, and I am at war with every pro-Shogunate faction. And this applies to everyone else as well on this campaign map, whether or not I drag them in these wars or not. So let's say, I go to Chosu, basically the Mori clan, and I ask them, hey, how about you join my war against all of these factions, which are pro-Shogunate factions, I might add. He's like, totally up for it. And that's one of the great things about this campaign of Fall of Samurai. So you have the early game, like in every other Total War game, where you're building an empire, expanding, But once you do achieve a high level of expansion, this is a long campaign on Legendary. It is modded, but this aspect of the game is not modded at all. It's not affected by mods. But once you reach a high level of strength, the game just throws a curveball at you, and you do end up with a real war actually starting out between these factions, and you do end up having large-scale battles. Like, look at this situation. There are 4 damn stacks over here in this situation. I've got 2, a third moving into position. I actually got saved in this situation because I thought I would be clever and launch a naval invasion, and then it's like I didn't realize there would be 2 entire stacks waiting for me, actually 4 entire stacks. So could have ended up very ugly, but my ally here ended up saving my hide, because by moving closer to the settlement created a concentration of force where the Yodo just basically withdrew. They could have, by the way, potentially wiped out my armies here if they really wanted to. They had an extra stack here, so there were actually 5 stacks in this general area on the campaign map before they intervened. I wiped and bought me some time, so I managed to wipe out one of those stacks. There's still another one, like this is the remnant of one of those stacks. There's still another one over here that I'm going to have to deal with. But either way, large-scale warfare between factions. I certainly think this is much better than what Warhammer does with its endgame crises. Instead of having an endgame crisis event where you just get, a significant number of AI forces spawning out of thin air, what this will do is it will create wars between factions that are still on the campaign map. In this particular case, the pro-Shogun forces actually do have the upper hand. They have the core territories that I need in order to win, and they do control a significant portion of Japan on the campaign map over here, like well over half of Japan, like, basically. So we do have a substantial portion, but we're still away from Edo, we're still away from Kyoto. It would be much easier, I think, to win this as the pro-Shogun forces, potentially. Though, keep in mind, I started on the exact opposite side of the campaign map from where I need to go. That's one of the problems with dealing with the Shimazu. Another thing that does happen with this event, it's not just about 2 coalitions forming, and putting rivalries to rest. So the Chosu and the Tosa, they actually were at war for much of this campaign. And because of this event, because of the diplomatic benefits that get created with this particular event, what ended up happening is they put their differences aside and now they are allies. But furthermore, when this event does trigger, one faction on each side is going to become the vanguard. So either the Shogun vanguard or the Imperial vanguard. So in my case, because I stayed pro-Imperial instead of going independent, which is basically something that harkens to a historical event where a certain pro-Shogun faction, once the Shogun was basically removed from power, did try and set up their own independent republic. It failed because the Imperials just wiped them out. But in this case, I have become the Imperial Vanguard. It did change my banner. It gave me a certain number of benefits as well on the campaign map. And crucially, there is a Shogun faction that has also gotten the same benefit. So myself and Obama, we have become the 2 most powerful factions on the campaign map at the moment, technically speaking. I mean, obviously I am significantly more powerful in a lot of ways, but to be fair, the Obama do have a really solid core of territories there, and it's probably not going to be so easy to dislodge them. They do have 8 provinces, I have 13. So they are closer to the front line than I am, so they have a bunch of the benefit. They do benefit from the situation. So what you end up with is kind of like the rival system that a Total War Saga Troy did have, where you have one particular faction that emerges as your rival, and this is what Fall of the Samurai does. So you have major coalition warfare between 2 sides, and you also have one major faction becoming really your main rival that you're going to have to deal with on the campaign map. Troy wishes it was as good of a game as Fall of the Samurai in this perspective. In fact, this system is pretty shocking to think that they didn't have a system like this in Well, they kind of did, but in the sense, you know, the pillars of the Daenons, the pillars of, you had the pillars of the Trojans, the pillars of the Achaeans. You had that kind of system, but it didn't really work out all that well, I'd argue. Sure, you would have those major alliances, but there were other problems in Troy that prevented that from being fully realized. I think the system in Fall of Samurai is one of the best systems to create that's conducive towards creating a really good, solid endgame scenario. And keep in mind, this isn't a situation where I'm playing with mods. I have a lot more income, I have a lot of armies, but I gotta say, this is not gonna be a cakewalk for me to win this campaign. It's like I have to deal with a bunch of armies and march across territories, and it's gonna be a problem. Sure, Shogun 2, don't get me wrong, Shogun 2 does have its limitations. Diplomacy situation, alliances, limitations on alliances, like alliances have been much improved in other Total War games, but this whole coalition warfare aspect is certainly one of the best aspects of Fall of Samurai that I would like to see more of in future Total War games. And I think it would actually work quite well in Warhammer 3. Like High Elves versus Dark Elves, Empire versus Chaos, Cafe versus Chaos, Dwarves versus Greenskins, Skaven. Yeah, you have the potential of quite a lot of coalitions taking place there, instead of what ends up happening a lot of the time right now, where you just ally a bunch of random factions, even when it doesn't necessarily make sense. It certainly makes the campaign map feel a lot better than it does in a lot of games, especially past the midpoint of the game, where things in virtually every other Total War game can become pretty stale or grindy. I mean, to be sure, there's still a bunch of grind to be had, but you're not just dealing with one faction at a time. That's one of the critical points. You're dealing with everyone. You have your side dealing with the other side, and that's what makes this system great. Questine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.